Agreed to. The gentleman from New York is recognized for an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report. The gentleman from Arizona reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from New York is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the underlying report states that, quote, the committees are concerned that foreign nationals appear to have sought access and influence by engaging in lucrative business relationships with high-profile political figures, immediate family members, close quote. And it states that the committee seeks to craft legislative solutions to address this problem. My amendment provides further context for this discussion by highlighting recent reporting concerning former President Trump and the businesses controlled by his family during his presidency. Given the majority's interest in foreign nationals seeking access and influence through business relationships, I presume that they were alarmed to learn from recent reporting that properties owned by former President Donald Trump and controlled by his family during his presidency received at least $7.8 million in foreign payments from 20 countries during his tenure, including $5.5 million from the Chinese government and its state-controlled entities, as well as sizable payments from Saudi Arabia. The concern over foreign and domestic influence over the office of the president and other public officials is so critical an issue that the nation's founding fathers included bars to such entanglements in Articles 1 and 2 of the Constitution, known as the emoluments clauses. As the framers knew, even the appearance of corruption can lead to reasonable concerns that our democracy is for sale. Donald Trump has a long history of connecting his views of other nations to his financial remuneration, stating in 2015, for example, that he likes Saudi Arabia very much, since they buy apartments from him and spend in the tens of millions of dollars on these apartments. Recently, he's had warm words for China's leader, Xi Jinping, repeatedly calling him, quote, an exceptionally brilliant individual, close quote. Could it be because the Chinese government lined the pockets of his family business throughout his presidency? We don't know. But if the committee is truly interested in pursuing questions related to foreign influence of presidents by means of business relationships with family members, it would be a glaring hole to ignore the business relationships of the previous president and his family. My amendment would correct this deficiency. I ask that my colleagues support the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Withdraw. The gentleman withdraws his objection. The gentleman from Florida is recognized to speak on the amendment.
I'm glad that the ranking member has ripened the question of bribes from China. I think it's one that I would like to explore with Hunter Biden if he were willing to properly acknowledge and honor the subpoena that he'd received from the United States Congress. And if there's any comparison on the Trump policies toward China and the Biden policies toward China, I am eager to engage in that comparison because President Trump put tariffs on China. He was tougher on China than any Republican or Democrat president in my lifetime for sure. And what I've learned about studying bribes is that when people pay them, they typically want something in return. And so when you've got these allegations about Trump in China, you're able to easily compare that to a record where Trump cracked down on China. Now let's compare that to the Biden record. After the Biden China bribes, you get the Biden administration dissolving the China initiative that President Trump and his administration set up at DOJ to specifically go after and prosecute Chinese efforts to engage in malign influence with academia, with politicians, with high society. And I know we have members of this committee intimately familiar with Chinese malign influence. And we would want a DOJ resilient and capable to be able to ensure that no one fell victim to that, from the United States Congress to even service on a city council. Now, Hunter Biden had this interesting email exchange on his laptop related to China that I can't wait to ask him about when a judge ultimately orders him here or to a jail cell. Why was Hunter Biden hosting the annual meeting for his investment fund at the home of the Chinese ambassador? Seems like an odd choice. There are a lot of great venues in Washington that could host the meeting for your annual investment fund, but when you choose to do it at the home of the Chinese ambassador, that seems to send a pretty clear message that it's hard to figure out where China ends and the Bidens begin. And I found it particularly interesting that while Hunter Biden was personally setting up this special and unique venue to convince people to invest in his fund based on his close ties with the Chinese, that all he had to do to secure the venue was agree to a private one-on-one meeting with the ambassador beforehand, which the emails indicate Hunter was readily willing to do. So aren't the rest of you curious to know what the ambassador wanted to meet with Hunter Biden about before Hunter Biden used his Chinese relationships to enrich himself, his family, his relatives, his uncle, his father, to pay the bills, to run the Biden crime family? I'd like to know what was going on at that meeting.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Let me just say, it may very well be that what Hunter Biden was doing was wholly improper. It may very well be that what Hunter Biden was doing was criminal. There is a special prosecutor. What there isn't is any evidence that President Biden had anything to do with any of this.
Well, I would suggest that the ambassador from China probably wasn't requesting a one-on-one meeting with Hunter Biden to go over investment tips and investment strategies. And if we had Hunter Biden in the witness chair, we could ask him. So it's one thing to say, well, there's just no evidence here. And then when we want to ask simple questions, like, was the ambassador asking about Hunter Biden's art interests and whether he preferred oil paintings or watercolors? I'm guessing that's not the case. And the reason Hunter Biden doesn't want to be in that witness chair is because when confronted with the documents and the evidence, they are boxed in. Because everybody in this country knows what was going on. Hunter Biden was the bag man. He was collecting the money, and Joe Biden was the inside man. And he was delivering the results for China and anyone else that was willing to pay him off. And that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. He seeks recognition. Question, gentleman from California.
I won't take the full 5 minutes, but I just want to sort of answer once and for all the absurd allegations about the former president. Not since George Washington have we likely had as wealthy a president as we did in President Donald Trump give up his day-to-day life as President Trump did. He gave up and put into trust 400 different entities, gave up control of them for his entire presidency. And for the Democrats to point to the sales that occurred at the Trump Hotel is not only beyond the pale, but it happens to be so factually incorrect with our founding fathers. During George Washington's presidency, were his thousands of acres simply laid fallow? Of course not. He continued to produce both wheat and grain, but also, as many know, alcohol. And he sold it. And he sold it to whoever bought it. And the buyer could well have been our own government. That was not the intent. And certainly, if his wheat or grain were exported and bought by some entity outside the U.S., nobody was going to say, oh my gosh, George Washington is on the pay of a foreign government. That's not what that clause in the Constitution means, and everyone knows it. But what it does mean is, did you receive funds, directly or indirectly, that were not for proper goods and services? That is what we believe Hunter Biden did. He received clearly millions of dollars into shadow companies, and there is little or no, in many cases, little or no actual performance, and certainly no history prior to the vice president having that position where Hunter Biden could go around the world selling it. But again, I'm going to just close. I said I'd make it in less than 5 minutes. We are not even talking about that, except that the Democrats want to keep making this about Donald Trump. It's not about Donald Trump or his family. If we had a subpoena to Donald Trump today or to his family and they wouldn't come, then I would be supporting a contempt until they did come. We have a valid, an undeniable subpoena that has not only been denied, but as I've said on every previous time, the middle finger has been pointed at the American people, and that is what we are here for today. I look forward to the vote and the final vote, and I yield back.
Gentleman is back. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I just want to correct the record, and that appears in the report that I have already put under unanimous consent into the record, the Democrats' report about the pocketing of millions of dollars over the course of 2 years of President Trump's term. I will note that once the Republicans came into the majority, now Chairman Comer shut down any more information coming to us about the other failures and taking of emoluments against the Constitution. But let's get the facts straight. Immediately, and I'm quoting the report, immediately after the 2016 election, ethics experts from across the political spectrum, reading the writing on the wall, urged the new president-elect to fully divest himself of his business interests and place them all in a truly independent blind trust. We all lived that. Guess what? It never happened. Again, quoting the report, throwing caution to the wind and the Constitution to the curb, former President Trump bluntly and cavalierly rejected all such bipartisan advice. Here's what he did. He instead chose to place the day-to-day management of his businesses in the hands of his 2 adult sons while retaining personal ownership and control of all his businesses, as well as the ability to draw funds from them without any outside disclosure. End quote. That's page 7 for those who want to begin to read the report. I'm not impressed that the former president did not take what he was constitutionally allowed to take, which was the president's salary. I am not impressed because if you go to the report and you take a look at what happened, information, page 10 of the report, information available to the committee shows that among countries patronizing Trump properties, China made the largest total payments to the president's private business interests. Let's see who it was. According to the subset of documents obtained from Mazars and additional documents from the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, these payments collectively included millions of dollars from China's embassy in the United States, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, a Chinese state-owned enterprise, and Hainan Airline Holding Company, a subsidiary of Chinese company HNA Group, owned by the Hainan provincial government. And if you turn to page 14, the largest entry, there's a grid of all of the money that they were able to track by way of the financial documents. China's the top performer. Total spending through China to the president's entities identified, again, just 2 years and just partial documents, $5,572,548. Where were those dollars deposited, basically? Pocketed? Trump Tower, Trump International Hotel, Washington, D.C., Trump International Hotel, Las Vegas, $5.5 million taken in during the president's time when he failed to divest himself. I don't know about you, but once the president lost and had to leave the White House under terrible duress, as we all lived, did you notice what happened at Trump International Hotel? Closed. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quickly, this is raw politics, and the other side is real good at it. So, don't keep your eye on the ball. Look at the shiny object that we have over here. The shiny object is Donald Trump. But the fact is that's not what this hearing is about. Now, we can talk about how Donald Trump made profits, that he was a businessman and a very successful one before he became president. When he made the profits while he was in the presidency, he donated those profits back to Treasury. We can talk about the fact that the Biden family has only and always made their money off of government. But the real issue at hand here is none of that. The real issue at hand is about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the relationship they had and the money that got filtered to the Biden family, that got filtered to Hunter because he was selling the presidency and the vice presidency. The real issue at hand is the fact that they made their money through the government and through influence peddling, and we want to find out more about that. What we're voting on today is not Donald Trump. It's none of it. But they want to have the public's eye on this other shiny object here. Let's keep the eye on the real issue, which is selling the United States government, which is selling foreign policy, which is doing the wrong thing. And Hunter and his dad were involved in it. We want to know more. And the last thing I'll say, Americans know. Anybody else, when they're subpoenaed and have to do a deposition, they do the deposition from a legal authority like the Judiciary Committee. But Hunter, once again, thinks he's above everybody else, separated from everybody else, and more powerful from everybody else. And that's wrong. And Americans know that too. Let's vote on the damned matter at hand and not digress on all these other issues. I yield back. I yield to Andy Biggs. I yield to my colleague, Congressman Biggs.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Van Drew. So this is an interesting diversion, as you say. It is a diversionary tactic. The reality is Hunter Biden, $24 million, and that is just a portion of what's been reported. But they're not interested in that. Not interested in that. He defies the subpoena. Not interested in that. We're going to raise something else. And so they're going to raise something else that's actually very intriguing because what happened to President Trump is he transferred management and authority, but he also transferred titles to the trust. And when you transfer titles, that is an ownership transfer. You have to understand that, and contrary to what my colleague across the aisle said, from 400 affiliated entities. Now, the other thing that's really intriguing here is he was providing services. He's a magnate. He's got real estate holdings throughout the world. One of those holdings was in Manhattan. In 2008, Chinese company that my colleague just referenced entered into a contract to lease space. It wasn't some amorphous 20-some-odd shell corporations. It was a real entity providing real space, real value in exchange for money. That was in 2008. Let's see here. Oh, that was during Obama's term. It wasn't during Trump's term. It wasn't during his term. And so money that was paid in to that trust occurred during some of his time in office, but it went to the trust. But you're not going to hear that from the other side. They're going to argue this thing and try to make somehow a moral equivalency issue. And that's what's disgusting about this. Why don't they just admit Hunter Biden defied the subpoena? He willfully defied it. In fact, Mr. Ivey from Maryland told us earlier today, much earlier today, and this day seems to extend. He said, yes, Hunter told us he wasn't going to come in. He willfully defied it. Guess what that means? You're in contempt of the subpoena you got. You don't get to say, hey, I'm going to come in when I want to come in, how I want to come in. You were given a date to come in, a time to come in, a location to come in, and you went out and held a press conference saying, I ain't going in. That is contempt. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the chairs, the noes have it.
Roll call, please.
Roll call being, after the roll call, we will recess. I believe the minority has 2 more amendments, and we'll come back and deal with those and then vote on the final passage. But let's do this vote, and then we'll go vote on the floor.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? No. Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Spartz? Ms. Spartz votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? No. Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Benz? Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew? Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels? Mr. Nels votes no. Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran? Mr. Moran votes no. Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Swallow? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes aye. Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Escobar votes aye. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy? Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye. Mr. Gates votes no.
Anyone else want to be recorded? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 9 ayes and 18 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. The committee will stand in recess until the conclusion of this vote series and then come back for the finishing of the work for today.